Welcome to Terran Apex Protocol, where the galaxy keeps underestimating humanity and keeps regretting it. If these stories are your kind of story, subscribe and stay with us. My name's Atlas. Today, a song that swallowed 3,000 fleets meets the one species that refuses to let any call go unanswered. Let's begin. The air recycler aboard the Penny Rose was flat by a quarter tone, and it was driving Mara Okafor insane. Nobody else on the tug could hear it. The captain swore the unit had passed inspection. The diagnostic panel glowed a smug, self-satisfied shade of green. But Mara heard it the way other people felt a splinter, a thin metallic whine sitting just under the hum of the engines, a B-flat that had given up on being a B-flat. She found the failing bearing in 11 minutes, by ear, with her cheek pressed against a maintenance duct and her eyes closed. She replaced it, powered the unit back up, and listened to the notes settle into tune like a guest finally taking the right chair. "Better," she said to no one. That was the scene Auditor Kelrin of the Veyric Accord walked into when he boarded the Penny Rose at Dock 17 of Karthus Relay. A human female crouched beside an air duct, humming at machinery. He stood in the airlock for 3 full seconds before stepping over the combing, which was, for an auditor of his grade, the loudest available expression of disapproval. The humans didn't notice that either. Kelrin had read the contract twice on the shuttle over, hoping he had misunderstood it. He had not. The Accord, in its bottomless wisdom, had hired a human salvage tug to retrieve black box recorders from the edge of the hollow choir. Not a naval vessel. Not a Quorath science ship with proper acoustic shielding and a crew whose minds were worth protecting. A rental species in a rented ship, because humans were cheap, available, and, in the precise wording of the procurement office, an acceptable loss category. Captain Rosa Quinones met him at the airlock with a cup of coffee in one hand and the contract flexi in the other. She was a short, broad woman with gray threading through her braid and the unhurried manner of someone who had been doing dangerous work for so long it had become administrative. "Auditor," she said, "welcome aboard. Don't touch the orange pipes, they bite." Kelrin's translator dutifully rendered the words, and he read them twice on his retinal display before accepting them. Was that a safety briefing? For a vessel? He had audited mining stations with longer orientation lectures than this entire ship seemed likely to provide. "You understand the nature of the destination," Kelrin said. It was not really a question. "The hollow choir," Quinones said. "Big pretty nebula, eats fleets. 3,000 and change over the last few centuries, if the briefing folder isn't exaggerating." 3,106 confirmed, Kelrin said. Fleets, survey wings, missionary convoys, and one entire colony migration. The region broadcasts a complex acoustic and electromagnetic signal. Crews who hear it stop responding to communication. Ships drift until their reactors die. "We do not say the choir eats them, Captain. We say they stay to listen." He expected fear. The big human only nodded slowly, the way one acknowledges weather. "And you want my crew to fly to the edge of that, pull black boxes off the dead ships, and fly out," she said. "The recorders from the Vethic Reach expedition are 40 years old," Kelrin said. "The Accord requires them for the tribunal. Your species expresses unusual resistance to the signal's entrainment effect in preliminary testing. Resistance," he added, "is not immunity. We have provided acoustic dampeners. You will follow exposure protocols precisely." From down the corridor came the human he would later know as Devacharya, engineer, carrying a coil of cable over one shoulder and singing badly. The melody wandered off its road, fell in a ditch, climbed out a different species of melody entirely, and the human seemed not only unbothered by this but actively pleased. Kelrin's plates rang a sharp interrogative he could not stop. "That's Dev," the captain said. "He's our good luck charm, completely tone deaf. The doctors back home wrote a paper about him. Kelrin stared at the singing human and felt the first hairline crack form in his understanding of this species. The Quorth were beings of resonance. Their skull plates rang with their emotions. Their cities were tuned like instruments. Their prayers were chords. A Quorath who sang wrongly would be corrected, gently, immediately, by everyone in earshot, the way one corrects someone whose clothing has caught fire. No Quorth could have produced the sounds this human was producing without suffering a neurological event, and yet the human walked on, trailing his ruined melody behind him like a banner. They are an acceptable loss category, Kelrin reminded himself, and went to inspect his quarters. The briefing folder, to its limited credit, had not exaggerated the Hollow Choir's history. Kelrin reviewed it again that night, because reviewing documentation was what he did instead of being afraid. The first recorded loss was the Selen pilgrimage, 11 centuries ago, 600 ships of a species now extinct, found drifting at the nebula's edge, with their entire population gathered in the observation galleries. Then the Mirim trade combines, who lost so many convoys they simply redrew their star charts and pretended the region did not exist, a solution Kelrin found administratively elegant and morally appalling. Then the Accord's own losses, survey wings, the missionary fleet of the Third Devotion, who had gone in deliberately, believing the song was the voice of their god, and who were, in the strictest sense, never proven wrong. 3,106 fleets, and the number had a footnote, because it counted only the ships someone had bothered to report missing. Every navy in the catalog had tried something. The Mirim had tried automation, crewless ships with recorded instructions. The ships went in, turned their bows to the heart of the cloud, and stayed, which was the single most discussed data point in the entire file, because machines did not have minds to take, and the song had kept them anyway. The Hessic had tried deafened crews, volunteers with their auditory organs surgically removed. The song came through their bones. The Accord had tried, in the desperate years after the Vethic Reach, sending in a choir of its own, 400 of the finest resonant voices of the Quorth homeworld, on the theory that perfect unison might satisfy whatever the cloud was demanding. The choir ship made it deeper than any vessel before or since. Then it, too, went quiet, and the song acquired, in its endless phrase, a new richness in the lower registers that no Quorth could bear to listen to closely. Nothing had ever come back out. That was the file's entire conclusion, 11 centuries compressed to 4 words. Kelrin closed the folder and lay in the dark of his borrowed cabin, listening to a human hum in the ductwork, and did not sleep. The Penny Rose undocked 6 hours later. She was not a beautiful ship. She looked, Kelrin recorded in his audit log, like a cargo container that had won a knife fight with a slightly larger cargo container. Her corridors were lined with handwritten labels. Her galley smelled of garlic and solder, and somewhere in her ductwork, always, there was humming. The comms technician, the one called Mara Okafor, hummed while she worked, quietly, absently, constantly. Scales, fragments, little looping figures that turned back on themselves. Kelrin noted it in the log as a possible stress behavior. He noted also, with reluctant precision, that her humming was perfectly in tune. 3 days out from Karthus Relay, the hollow choir rose in the forward viewports, and even Kelrin's audit log fell briefly silent. The nebula was a cathedral of dust the size of 40 solar systems, lit from inside by the embers of old stars, all rose and violet and a deep aching blue. Around its edge, like flies in amber, hung the fleets. Thousands of ships, centuries of them, perfectly preserved, perfectly still, bows all pointed inward toward the heart of the cloud. Listening. "Mother of God," Quinones said softly. "They're all facing it." The signal reached them 11 minutes later. It did not come through the speakers. That was the first thing the briefings had failed to make Kelrin understand. The signal came through the hull, through the deck plating, through the long bones of the body and the small bones of the ear, a slow, vast phrase that bypassed every dampener because it was not, strictly, sound. It was structure. Pattern. It folded itself into whatever medium it found, radiation, vibration, the firing rhythm of neurons, and it sang. Kelrin's plates locked. He did not decide to stop walking. He simply found that he had stopped, one hand on the corridor wall, his entire crest ringing in helpless, sympathetic resonance with the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. It was a phrase of perhaps 30 seconds, rising, turning, reaching, and then stopping, unfinished, on a suspended interval that pulled at something behind his hearts. Then it began again, rising, turning, reaching, stopping, auditor. The phrase rose, turned, reached for its resolution, and stopped, and the unfinishedness of it was a physical pain, was a hook through the chest, was auditor. Hey, big guy. A hand, blunt and warm, closed on his shoulder and shook him. The corridor swam back into focus. Mara Okafor stood in front of him, and she was doing two things at once. The first was looking into his eyes with calm, professional concern. The second, he realized slowly, was tapping. Her free hand tapped a rhythm against her thigh, an odd, lopsided, syncopated figure, and her boot heel caught the offbeats against the deck. His plates, which had been ringing in perfect helpless unison with the signal, stumbled. The tapping did not match the song. It cut across it, played around it, dodged the great phrases pull the way a small boat cuts across a swell. His crest gave a confused jangle and unlocked. Breathe, the human said. Don't fight the sound. Just don't dance to it. Dance to me instead. Dance to her. Kelrin's report would describe what followed with as much dignity as he could fabricate, which was not a great deal. The auditor of the Varick Accords stood in a tug's corridor while a human comms technician tapped jazz against her leg, and he clung to that broken, sideways, deliberately wrong rhythm like a drowning creature clinging to driftwood. The song reached for him through the deck. The tapping turned its grip aside, over and over, beat after beat. On the bridge, he found the rest of the crew already adapted in the same impossible way. Quinones had music playing over the ship's speakers, something human and ancient with a stubborn walking pulse to it. Dev conducted with a spanner, gloriously out of time with everything including himself. And Kelrin understood, with the particular vertigo of a professional discovering his briefing folder was worthless, why the humans were resistant. Quarth minds entrained. They were built to fall into step, to ring together, to join the chord. It was their glory. The song took that glory and used it as a handle. Humans syncopated. Their whole musical instinct was to push against the pulse, to land just before or just after the expected beat, to hear a pattern and immediately, joyfully, contradict it. The song reached into their minds for a handle and found 10,000 handles, all of them spinning in different directions, none of them load-bearing. It's a hell of a tune, Quinones admitted, working a toothpick to splinters at her station, helm steady. Catchy. But you put it next to a backbeat, and it's just another big voice that thinks it's the only one in the room. We've all met one of those. Kelrin recorded the entire watch in his log, and then sat looking at his summary line for a long time before he could bring himself to file it. Resistance mechanism, he had written. The humans are not resistant to the song. They are resistant to agreement. The song had been reaching for them for 6 hours when it noticed them reaching back. It happened during Mara's watch, and Kelrin was there to record it, perched at the auxiliary station he had claimed as his audit post. The humans ran their countermeasure the way they ran everything, casually, with a rotation schedule taped to the bulkhead. 2 hours of exposure, then below decks into the shielded core with headphones and loud, aggressively rhythmic human music. Quinones rationed the song the way old wet Navy captains had rationed rum. Mara took double watches because, she said, somebody on this boat should actually be listening to the thing instead of just dodging it. She listened with a notation pad. That was the part Kelrin could not stop watching. While every other species in the catalog had met the song with weapons, dampeners, or prayer, this human transcribed it, breaking the vast phrase down into intervals and time signatures, her pen moving, her foot keeping its small contrary beat. "Walk me through your analysis," Kelrin said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "Okay, so." She spun her pad toward him. 31.5 seconds. It opens with a rising fifth, which is, trust me, the single most call-shaped thing a melody can do. Every herding culture on Earth opens a field holler with it. It develops, it turns, and then it stops on a suspended fourth, which is the most unresolved interval we've got. It's the sound of a question mark. And then, this is the thing, auditor, then there's silence. 8 beats. Exactly 8, every loop, for 11 centuries, like it's counting. You know what that is? A rest, Kelrin said. Number A rest belongs to the singer. Mara tapped the empty bars on her pad. This belongs to somebody else. It's leaving room. It's the gap in the conversation where the other person is supposed to talk. I've sung in choirs my whole life. I know what a call sounds like when it's waiting for its response. I just don't know why nothing I hum back makes it through. She found out at the end of that watch. The song's phrase came around again, rising, turning, and this time, woven into its development, faint and unmistakable, was a quarter-tone flat B, a thin metallic whine, a note that had given up on being a B-flat. The exact voice of the Penny Rose's faulty air recycler, the one Mara had fixed 3 days ago, sung back to her from a cloud you could lose a navy in. Her pen stopped. Her foot stopped. "It hears us," she said quietly. "It's been hearing us this whole time. It's not singing at the galaxy, auditor. It's singing to whoever walks past, in whatever voice they brought with them. And everyone keeps walking past." Kelrin looked at the viewport, at the cathedral of rose and violet dust, and his plates rang very softly. Without his permission, a note his own audit log would have classified as grief. That night cycle, Kelrin found Devacharya in the galley at an hour when the ship pretended to sleep, eating noodles and watching the nebula through the little port above the sink. The engineer waved him in with a fork. "Can't sleep either, huh?" Dev nudged a second bowl across the table. Unasked, an act Kelrin's culture would have required 3 formal invitations to produce. You get used to the song after a few days. That's what scares everybody, I figure. Not the sound, the getting used to it. You cannot hear it, Kelrin said. The music, any music. I have read your medical file. The condition is called amusia. Your brain does not process melodic structure at all. Yep, Dev said, entirely cheerful. Whole family's musical too. My mother directed a temple choir in Pune for 30 years. My sister plays sitar on actual albums. And then there's me. He slurped a noodle. You know what my mother told me when the doctors explained it? She said, "Fine, you can't carry the tune, so you'll carry the singers. Somebody has to drive the van. Somebody has to fix the amp. Every choir on Earth has a dev. We're load-bearing." Kelrin considered the small human in the galley light, the only mind on the ship the song had found no purchase on at all. The man who walked through a cathedral of dust that had eaten 3,000 fleets while singing his ruined, happy, unstealable songs. "And it does not grieve you," he asked, "to stand outside the door of the single thing your whole family lives inside?" Dev was quiet for a moment, which Kelrin had already learned was rare enough to be data. "Sure it does," he said at last. "But here's the thing, auditor. You don't have to hear the music to know when somebody's singing alone." He pointed his fork at the viewport, at the rose and violet dark. "I've been listening to that thing since we hit the edge, same as everybody. Can't hear a note of it. And I'll tell you what it sounds like to me anyway. It sounds like my mother's choir hall at 2 in the morning, when everyone's gone home and one light's still on. That's not an acoustic profile. You don't need working ears for that. You just need to have ever been lonely. Kelrin returned to his cabin and sat for a long time before his audit log, and in the end he recorded only one line. The tone-deaf one understands the phenomenon better than the tribunal does. They found the Vethic Reach on the second day, hanging at the choir's edge, exactly where it had drifted for 40 years. A Quarith battle fleet, 900 ships, hulls still bright. The Penny Rose moved through it slowly, running lights washing over silent gun decks, and even Dev stopped humming. Kelrin had insisted on joining the boarding team. It was his tribunal, his evidence, his people. He regretted the insistence within 4 minutes of crossing the flagship's airlock. The crew of the Vethic Reach were at their stations. Every one of them. 40 years of vacuum had dried and silvered them, and they sat in their restraint harnesses, with their plates fanned wide open, the Quarith posture of total surrendered listening, and every single body on that bridge was leaning, very slightly, toward the speakers. Mara moved through the dead with a strange gentleness, reading the consoles. The black boxes came free one by one. It was at the communication station that she stopped, and stood very still, and said, in a voice gone quiet and wrong, auditor. They weren't just listening. Look, the comms officer's console was not in receiving mode. It was in broadcast mode. The dead officer's hands were still resting on the transmission keys. All around the bridge, Kelrin saw it now with mounting horror, consoles jury-rigged, amplifiers cannibalized, the entire fleet's communication grid rewired in its final hours into one vast, desperate instrument. They were trying to sing back, Mara said. 40 years ago. They heard what I'm hearing, and they tried to answer it, and they didn't have time to figure out how. What do you mean, what you are hearing? Kelrin said. Mara was silent for a moment. Through her helmet's faceplate, her expression was the careful blankness of someone deciding how much truth a situation can bear. It's a call, she said finally. The song. It's not a broadcast, it's not a weapon, it's a call and response. Every choir tradition on earth has it. A leader sings the call, the congregation sings the answer. Same shape here, I'd bet my pension. 30-second phrase, suspended ending, a built-in silence 8 beats long, and then it starts over. That silence is a space, auditor. It's a space where an answer is supposed to go. Something out there has been singing the first half of a duet for 10,000 years, and nobody has ever once sung the second half. You are describing intent, Kelrin said, in the voice he used for findings he intended to reject. The signal is a natural phenomenon. The tribunal has already ruled on its classification. Sure, Mara said, turning back to the dead officer at the broadcast console. And your tribunal can explain the classification to this guy. They were 2 hours back aboard the Penny Rose, 11 black boxes in the hold, when the song changed. Dev heard it first, which should have been impossible, because Dev couldn't hear music at all. He was running cable down the spine corridor when the great phrase came up through the deck on its eternal loop, rising, turning, reaching, and somewhere inside its enormous voice, faint as a thumbprint on glass, it sang a fragment of melody back at him. Wandering, off its road, falling in a ditch and climbing out a different melody, his own, his ruined, tuneless, joyful corridor song, sung back to him in a voice with weather inside it. Dev stood frozen for one long moment. Then, very quietly, the tone-deaf man whispered, "Oh, you like that one, huh?" and sang the next line. The song took him between one breath and the next. They found him at the portside airlock, with the inner door already cycled, and his hand on the outer release, smiling, plates of frost, forming on the glass from his breath, singing along at last with something that finally sang in his key. Quinones hit him with a cargo net. Mara hit the emergency lock. Dev fought them with the terrible single-minded strength of a man, being pulled away from the best conversation of his life, and then his eyes rolled back and he folded, and he did not wake up. Medbay said his vitals were stable, and his brain was a lit-up Christmas tree, every auditory and motor rhythm center firing in perfect 30-second loops. Rising, turning, reaching, stopping. "He's still in there," Mara said, watching the readouts. "It's got him singing harmony. It's wearing him like a—" She stopped, hands tightening on the rail. "Like a string on an instrument." "It adapted," Kelrin said hollowly. 40 years of fleets, and it learned to imitate. It found the one voice on this ship that could not tell a true note from a false one, and it sang to him in his own music. Auditor procedure offered him nothing for this moment, so he said the other thing, the smaller, truer thing. "He sang badly," Kelrin said, "and your doctors wrote a paper, and I have hated the sound of him in the ducts since the hour I boarded. I would surrender my plates to hear it now." Mara stayed at the medbay rail long after the others left, watching on the readouts loop, and Kelrin watched her face change in a way his audit vocabulary had no entry for. Whatever she was concluding in there, she did not share it yet. He would learn later that he had been present for the exact moment, and had filed it, uselessly, under observation continues. High Marshal Drovak of the Varick Accord arrived 18 hours later with 30 ships of the line and a sun in a bottle. The Edict of Silence was the largest vessel Kelrin had ever stood inside, and its commander matched it, an old Quarath gone gray at the plate roots, his crest scarred and cracked and refused along lines that no battle damage would explain. Kelrin knew the lines. Everyone of his generation knew. Self-inflicted, 40 years old, the marks of a commander who had clawed at his own resonance to keep from answering a song his whole fleet was already singing. Drovak had commanded the Vethic Reach expedition. He had been the only survivor. He had spent 4 decades building the weapon that now hung in the Edict's forward bay. Final rest, a stellar collapse charge, enough to crush the Hollow Choir's heart and the half-born stars inside it into one brief, clean, silent black hole. The Marshal received them in the Edict's strategy hall. Beneath a memorial wall that ran the room's full length, 900 ship names etched in resonant crystal. Every name a crew, every crew his. His aide, a young officer named Suvex, conducted them in with the brittle formality of a soldier serving a legend and knowing it. The whole Accord was watching this deployment. Suvex had informed them on the way, with open pride. 4 decades of design and politics and grief, and the feeds of 40 worlds were carrying the countdown live. When Final Rest fired, the Marshal's long war would end in front of the largest audience in Accord history. "He doesn't want an audience," Mara murmured, looking at the old Quarath, standing alone beneath his wall of names. "He wants a witness. Those are different things." "Your contract is concluded," Drovak told the humans, in the flat tone of a being who had rehearsed this day so long the words had worn smooth. "The recorders will be transferred to the tribunal. In 19 hours, Final Rest deploys, and this region will finally stop singing. You will be compensated and escorted to the relay." "He hears it in his sleep," Kelrin said quietly to Mara as they were escorted out. "Every night cycle for 40 years. The medics call it residual entrainment. He calls it nothing. He has never once spoken of it." Mara stopped in the middle of the corridor of the great warship, and Kelrin watched the thing happen in her face that he would spend the rest of his career trying to describe in reports. It was not inspiration. It was recognition. "He still hears the call every night," she said slowly, "and he's never been able to answer it, so he's going to kill it instead. Auditor, I know exactly how much that costs. I've been doing the same thing for 6 years," she told him on the shuttle back, in the toneless voice humans used for the things that mattered most. A brother, Tunde, 3 years younger, the better musician of the two of them, the one who stayed home when she went to the conservatory. A voicemail on her terminal, him singing the opening of the duet they used to do as kids, the call half, the leading half. "Hey Mar, finish it for me when you get this, like always." She had been busy. A recital week. She was going to answer it on the weekend. There was no weekend. Aneurysm. 26 years old. I know the exact shape of an unanswered call, Mara said. I've had one sitting on my terminal for 6 years. I can't even delete it. And that thing out there, that thing that's been singing the same unfinished phrase for 10,000 years into a silence that never sings back, it has one too. The dead fleets aren't its victims. Auditor, they're its grief. It keeps borrowing voices and they keep burning out. Because a voice that only echoes you isn't an answer. Unison isn't an answer. Any choir director will tell you. You don't complete a call by copying it. She looked up, and her eyes were wet and entirely steady. You complete it with a harmony. Don't match it. Answer it. Kelrin's plates rang one low, astonished chord. You intend to sing to the hollow choir. I intend to sing with it, Mara said. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole point. I need your help to get permission. There was no permission. Drovak heard the proposal in full, motionless as his own memorial wall. And at the end he said only, the last crew that tried to answer it is still at their stations, and I will not feed it another, and had them confined to the Penny Rose pending escort. But he did not leave the room when his officers escorted the others out. He stood beneath his wall of 900 names and looked at the human technician for a long, ringing moment, and when he spoke again the parade voice was gone, and what remained was old and quiet and cracked along its fused lines. You believe I have not considered it, he said, answering. You believe that in 40 years it never once occurred to me. Mara said nothing. The marshal turned to the wall and touched one name, low on the third column, with a precision that made it clear his hand had traveled that exact path 10,000 times. My corps master, Drovak said. The Vethic Reach carried a fleet choir, as all our fleets did then. When the song took the ships, the choir fought it the only way they knew. They sang against it. Counterphrase. Discipline against beauty. I was in a shielded pod bay, too far to join, close enough to hear. They held the fleet's minds for 11 hours, technician. 400 voices against a nebula. And one by one I heard my people stop singing our song and start singing its song, and the last voice to turn, the very last, was hers. He took his hand from the wall. I have heard every argument for answering the choir. I heard them all in one night, in voices I knew. The song does not want a duet. It wants a larger choir. And it is always, always recruiting. That's grief talking, Mara said softly. Not analysis. Grief, Drovak said, is the only analyst who never files a final report. You have your own unanswered call, I think. I know the posture. Very well, here is mine. He looked up at the wall, all 900 names of it. I do not get to answer mine, technician. The mercy I can still perform is making certain no one else ever has to leave one. Escort them to their ship. Then he moved the deployment up. Final rest would fire in 4 hours. It was Kelrin who broke first. Kelrin the auditor. Kelrin who had filed every form of his life in triplicate. He stood in the Penny Rose's galley, listening to the song, come up through the deck, rising, turning, reaching, stopping, and he thought of Dev's vitals looping in the med bay, and the dead bridge crew leaning toward their speakers, and a gray marshal lying awake every night of his long life, with a call he could not answer, ringing in his cracked and self-scarred plates. We are beings of resonance, he said. We ring together. It is our glory. And the song took it from us, and my people have spent 40 years calling that theft a war. He turned to Quinones. Captain, if your technician is wrong, we lose her, and the weapon fires, and history does not change. If she is right, no one ever drifts into that cloud again. I have performed audits for 60 years. I have never once seen a risk priced this generously. Quinones looked at Mara for a long moment, captain to crew, the oldest question in the Spacer's catalog asked with no words at all. Mara nodded. Well, the captain said, and drained her coffee. Drovak's going to be writing reports about this for the rest of his unnatural life. Set it up. They did it with salvage. It was, Kelrin thought, the most human possible way to address a cosmic power, with cargo straps and cannibalized amplifiers and handwriting on tape. They rigged the Penny Rose's hull the way the Vethic Reach's doomed crew had rigged their fleet. Every transmitter slaved to one channel, the tug's whole battered skeleton turned into a soundboard. Mara stood at the comm station, with her boots planted wide, and her brother's 6-year-old voicemail queued on a second channel. Because, she said, if I'm finally answering calls today, I'm answering both. The Edict of Silence noticed the power spike immediately. Drovak's face filled the main screen, plates ringing fury. Cut your transmitters. That is a direct order under emergency authority. You have no conception of what you are reaching into. Marshal, Mara said, you've heard it every night for 40 years. You know exactly what I'm reaching into. You brought a star killer. We brought the second verse. Final rest is firing in 11 minutes, Drovak said. Whatever you intend, it dies with the choir. Then I'd better sing fast, Mara said, and cut the channel. The song came up on its eternal loop, rising, turning, reaching. 6 years since she had sung a note. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the console, and Kelrin watched her do the thing the humans did. Watched her tap her foot, 1, 2, 3, 4, claiming her own time inside the song's vast tide, a small, stubborn backbeat against 10,000 years. The phrase reached its suspended interval, stopped. The 8-beat silence opened like a held breath, the space where an answer was supposed to go, the space where 3,000 fleets had drowned. Mara Okafor closed her eyes and sang into it. Not the song's melody, never the melody. A third above it, the harmony line, the answering shape, the second voice of the duet her brother used to lead, bent to fit a phrase written by something older than her species. The hull of the Penny Rose took her small voice and made it a voice the choir could hear. And on 40 worlds, on the feeds that had tuned in to watch a weapon end a war, the largest audience in Accord history heard a human voice climb into the gap that had swallowed 3,000 fleets. Then the hollow choir answered her. The new phrase was not the old phrase. 10,000 years of the same 30 seconds, and the song sang something new, a turn, a question, a reaching toward, and it left the silence again, and Mara was already there, answering, her voice cracking on the high interval and not caring, tears running freely down her face, and the song bent itself around her line like a creature leaning into a touch. Call, response. Call, response. The cloud the size of 40 solar systems, and the comms tech from a salvage tug, trading verses. On the Edict of Silence, the firing sequence for final rest reached its final authorization and waited for one keystroke. Suvek stood at the weapons station with the marshal's standing order in his queue, and the song and the human voice braided together in the bones of his skull, and he did the arithmetic of his entire career in 4 seconds. Then the young officer turned to the command dais and asked, in the formal register, for the order to be given in person, knowing the regulation required it, knowing it would cost a full minute, knowing exactly what he was buying with it. Drovak did not give the order. He stood on his dais with his scarred crest ringing, very quietly, in a key no one aboard had ever heard from him, and he listened to the gap in the song the way a man listens at the door of a room where someone he loves is finally, after a long fever, sleeping. State for the record, he said at last, that the weapon was held at my command. Then, lower, to no one, in the oldest dialect of the homeworld, the one reserved for choirs. Hold the verse. The second voice has it. Call, response. And on the third exchange, something in the music changed that every species heard differently, and none ever forgot. The Quarath say the cantor's voice lost a weight it had carried so long the weight had seemed like part of the voice. The Mirim traders, who do not believe in anything, say their hull sensors recorded a harmonic settling, like a structure relaxing onto its true foundations. The humans, being humans, say it more simply. They say it stopped sounding like a search party and started sounding like a homecoming. In the medbay, Dev Acharya took one enormous breath, opened his eyes, and complained that somebody had stopped the music. Across 900 dead ships of the Vethic Reach, every console flickered once, gently, like a sigh, and went dark. Released. And deep in the choir's heart, the sensors of 2 fleets finally saw it true. Not a weapon, not a god, but a single living thing, the size of a moon, ancient and luminous and alone, the last navigation beacon of a maker race 10 million years gone, still faithfully singing the homecoming call it had been grown to sing, to ships that were never coming home. The Quarath would name it in their way, with a catalog number and a hazard class. The humans named it first, and theirs stuck, the way human names always stuck, the Cantor. The feedback surge came on the 4th exchange, a power spike up the jury-rigged amplifier chain, and the last thing Mara's left ear ever heard clearly was the Cantor's new phrase resolving, at long last, into rest. The eardrum and half the cochlea were gone before the breakers tripped. She finished the verse anyway, holding the line on the hearing that remained, and when the medics finally pulled her from the console, she was still tapping the beat against the rail. 1, 2, 3, 4. Aboard the Edict of Silence, High Marshal Drovak stood the firing watch down. He did it in person, plate by plate removing the command keys, and his bridge crew pretended, with the kindness of soldiers, not to see what was happening along the old scarred lines of his crest. He came aboard the Penny Rose without honor guard, an old gray being in a plain uniform, and stood before a deaf-sided human woman with a medical patch behind her ear. "I have not slept silent in 40 years, he said. Last night, there was no call. There was only, his plates rang, searching for it, a resolved chord. My fleet, the Vethic Reach. It used their voices for harmony because it had nothing else, and when you answered, it let them go. It let them rest." He bowed then, the full formal bow of the accord, scarred crest to deck level, a high marshal to a salvage tech. 40 years I tried to silence it. Your species taught it to rest. I should have hired humans in the first hour. You are the only species in the catalog that cannot leave a call unanswered. We're also an acceptable loss category, Mara said. It's in the contract. I have, Drovak said, amended the contract. The Accord built the listening station at the choir's edge inside a year, and it remains, to this day, the strangest duty posting in known space. One shift in every cycle, a voice goes on the wire and sings the response, and the Cantor, no longer starving, no longer reaching into passing minds for borrowed instruments, sings its homecoming call to every ship that passes, and lets every one of them pass. Navigators bless it now. 3,000 fleets worth of black boxes have gone home to 3,000 fleets worth of families. Choir duty is the most requested human posting in the Accord registry, and the waiting list is 11 years long, and the first name ever on it was Dev Acharya, who still cannot carry a tune, and whom the Cantor still, unmistakably, greets. Kelrin filed his final audit, and then, in the same transmission, his transfer request, permanent, to the station his report had made necessary. His last entry before the transfer was quoted at the tribunal and is now carved above the listening station's airlock. I priced this crew as an acceptable loss, he wrote. I have spent 60 years auditing value, and I missed the largest asset in the catalog because it would not fit in a column. Let the record show how the war ended. A human tapped her foot and sang the harmony. They offered Mara the directorship of the station. She turned it down and went back to the Penny Rose, half-deaf, fully content, because the tug's recycler had gone flat by a quarter tone again, and some things you fix yourself. But on the night before departure, she sat alone at her terminal, cued a 6-year-old voicemail, and sang the answer to it, all the way through, in harmony with a dead man's call, while outside the viewport, a creature the size of a moon held one soft note underneath her like a hand at her back. Somewhere out past the choir, the deep survey arrays were already picking up a second signal, fainter, farther, singing a different unfinished phrase into the dark. The Accord has not yet decided what to do about it. The humans have already started rehearsing,